Hey, something else we can use our cumulative frequency for is to come up with what we call a Pareto chart. And a Pareto chart is based on the Pareto principle. You might have heard of it before, the 80-20 rule. It kind of means that there's this rule that kind of says, look, 80% of, let's say, your output comes from 20% of your input, or maybe 80% of your complaints come from 20% of your customers, or 80% of your sales come from 20% of your staff. There's this thing called the 80-20 rule, and that's basically what we're going to use with our Pareto chart. So let's see how we build one up. Here is some data. These are sales made by staff members over a month. Okay, I've listed them in order. These are the frequencies. So Barry was 32 sales, Jane was 28, etc. Now, when we're doing these Pareto charts, we want to list our frequencies in order from the most frequent down to the least frequent. After we've done that, and you can see everything's in order here, I am going to work out the cumulative frequencies. So hopefully you can remember from a previous video, we start with our first frequency because it's just the frequencies as they accumulate down. That's where the cumulative bit comes from. So I'm going to take the 32. I'm going to now add it to the next frequency. And when I add them together, I get 60 is my cumulative frequency. 60 plus 25 will give me 85 plus 18, etc., etc., until I go all the way through. Now, hopefully you remember that this number here in the last box on a cumulative frequency is actually the total number of scores. So if I added up all those sales, it should come to 130. So there were 130 sales in the month. This is my cumulative frequency. But I've got another column here now. This is called cumulative percentage. What is that? Well, this is just the percentage of the total sales that each one of these cumulative frequencies figures are. Maybe it'd be easier if we do one. This Barry, at this point, the cumulative frequency is 32. It's 32 out of 130 sales. So I would write 32 over 130. Okay, so take the cumulative frequency, divide it by the total number of scores, and I see that's 0.25. Now, don't forget to turn that into a percentage. I multiply it by 100, and I get 25%. So the cumulative frequency at this point is 25%. Now, I'm going to repeat that process. At this point, my cumulative frequency is now 60. So it is 60 out of 130. Okay, so at this point, 60 of the 130 sales, it's 0.46, and you can see hopefully that's 46%. Now, if I repeat that same process, I'll do 85 over 130, which gets me 65%, etc., etc., until I get to the bottom, which should always read 100%, because we've covered all of the scores. That is important because we're going to use that in our Pareto chart. So I'm going to just move that off to the side, and let's draw up the Pareto chart. Now, there are a couple of very specific things on the Pareto chart. This just looks like a frequency histogram, and so far that's exactly what it is. I've got the sales up the left-hand column, and I've got in order from the most frequent, the highest frequency, down to the lowest. So I can see Barry, Jane, Adam, Mark, etc., etc. And this stage, easy. It's just a frequency histogram. To turn this into a Pareto chart, I'm going to add another scale, this time on the right-hand side. So the left-hand side is my sales scores. On the right-hand side is the percentages, going from 0 to 100 to cover my cumulative percentages. So let's have a look. For Barry, oops, a daisy, I lost it. So for Barry, the cumulative frequency percentage was 25. So in Barry's column, I'm going to come up until it lines up with 25. So I'm going to hit 25 on my cumulative frequency percentage, and I'm going to come across and pop a point there for Barry. So that represents, so it's kind of like a second scale on top of it, really. I've got 25% for Barry. For Jane, the cumulative percentage was 46. So I'll come up to 46, come across, pop it there, and you can see I'm going to repeat that process now. 65% for Adam, 79%, etc., etc., until I get up to 100% for Maddie. That's this number here. So in Maddie's row, the cumulative percentage was 100%. I'm going to join them all together with a line, and that is it. Pretty much done. That's my Pareto chart. Now, what does that show me? The Pareto chart is showing me this 80-20% sort of visually. So what I mean by that is if I come up to 80% and draw a line across till it hits my cumulative frequency curve, I can then drop that down and I can see everything above this point. So from here across to the left, that represents 80% of my scores. So I can look at that and say, look, Barry, Jane, Adam, and Mark together came up with roughly 80% of our sales. So let's look at that and see if we can answer a couple of questions off it. What if you were asked, hey, which person has the least sales? Well, that's pretty obvious. I can have a look and see. Maddie's histogram here shows that she had the least sales. What's the cumulative percentage of the top two salespeople? The top two salespeople are Barry and June, and the cumulative percentage is represented by this point here, which I can see is 46%. All right, it also shows me here Barry and Jane, not June. Cumulative percentage of 46%. So those two salespeople came up with 46% of our sales. Apply the 80-20 rule to find the top sales team. Well, that's kind of what we did before. I start at 80%, I come across, I drop a line, and pretty much everything that's on the left-hand side of this piece represents 80% of my scores. So I can see Barry, Jane, Adam, and Mark were my top sales team based on the 80-20 rule or the Pareto principle. And that, what you see there, is our Pareto chart.